It takes a brave and independent mindset to go tiny. If you are trying to figure out your tiny pivot, this podcast is here to inspire and connect you with the other unconventional, gritty, inspirational people within this community. I am Laura Lynch, your tiny house friend and host. On this show, we are always going to come back to money because as a financial planner, this is the question I hear the most. How do I make this work for me financially? Well, that's my jam, so jump in, let's go. New episodes drop every Thursday. Hey, Forrest, welcome to Less House, More Moolah. I am super excited to have you here. It's so serendipitous, everything about the tiny living community, the way that you get connected with folks. You had connected with one of my previous guests, Christopher Hensley, and then Christopher Hensley is like, this guy needs to be on your podcast. And so he sent your information over to me. And gosh, we had such a great pre-call. Thanks for being here and sharing your story. So to get us kicked off, just share with us how you began your journey of tiny living.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks, Laura. I'm excited to be on this podcast as well. And, I think you're right. It is really, it's fitting. I have a lot to talk about tiny houses and living small. And I have a history myself of doing that. So that to kind of tell you my story with relation to that, I didn't really know this would have been 2012. I bought a minivan, and with the idea of just traveling, me and my partner, now fiance, we wanted to just travel, and we thought, okay, what's a good way to do that? And previously, I had traveled, I'd done some backpacking, and I had hitchhiked, and I kind of wanted to do travel like that, but have more comfort. So with that, I just thought, okay, what's better than a van? And so I bought a van and started building it out. And basically, by building it out, I mean making a bed frame, putting a futon mattress in there, and underneath the bed frame having storage capabilities. So it was really, really bare bones. And I, at the time, was making some YouTube videos of just my travels. And I didn't know anything about the van life community. That wasn't really like a popular thing at the time. That wasn't in the mainstream at all. It was something that people did, but didn't think much about, just traveling in a van. So I shot some videos on my van build out, and those videos did just so much better than any of my travel videos. And with that, insight of seeing that the amount of like the audience for that, I just thought, what is this? Like, why are these people interested in this? So I looked further into it, and I began to see that there's this whole community of people living in vans, living in small spaces. It was tied to minimalism, which is the concept of basically only having the things that really serve you, and being really conscious about the things that you bring into your life, the objects you bring into your life. And I started exploring that a little bit more. And I'm a filmmaker, and at that time I was kind of beginning my filmmaking journey, and I started just making films about people living in small spaces. Um, so that's kind of how it began. And throughout that, I upgraded to a bigger van. I got a 1988 Toyota motorhome, which I still have. We kind of renovated it and made it look really nice and function really well, and actually be able to be off grid in it, because RVs are basically built to go from like RV campground to RV campground. They're not really built for anything else, so you have to modify them. And within that, I've now made 250 plus documentaries about people living in small spaces or unique. The series is called Alternative Dwellings, so it kind of spans. It goes into tiny houses, it goes into sailboats, goes into off grid, it goes into van life. And yeah, that's basically how I got interested and involved in the the tiny house and alternative dwelling spaces.
Yeah, and when you and I were talking before, you mentioned that you were also seeing some of the challenges within your community and the way that tiny living was solving a particular problem. So, talk a little bit about what you're seeing. You're in Canada. So,
Mhm.
what are you seeing up there, and how is tiny living helping people?
Well, Canada, we have a really tight real estate market. If something becomes available that's suitable, we have a lot of people interested in owning their own house, and not a lot on the market. And a lot of that is to do with regulations and cost of building and all sorts of different things. But it's created a really expensive space to own a home basically anywhere in Canada. Specifically, there's a few really key areas of Canada that people want to live, so those markets are really hot. And I grew up on Vancouver Island, and Vancouver Island is basically one of those spots. There's no cheap housing on Vancouver Island at all. Victoria, specifically, Tofino, specifically, and those are both places that I've lived in the past. Really high rent, and a lot of the people I was filming with when I lived in Victoria and when I lived in Tofino, they saw living small as an opportunity to escape the housing crisis that they were living in, and they saw it as a way to get ahead. A lot of them, some of them were students going to school, and instead of paying outrageous rent to get an education, they were able to live in a van or a tiny house and actually pay a lot less in expenses and be able to not have such a huge student debt, or be able to basically use that as a stepping stone to further their life. Um, and I saw, yeah, that's a huge reason behind a lot of people doing this, is the financial aspect of the potential of having lower costs.
Yeah, we have said previously on this podcast that housing is like the biggest lever that you can pull, right? For many people, it makes up 35, 40, more than 40% of their overall cost of living. And so, if you can really dial that down, you give yourself such a significant pay raise in terms of redirecting that money towards something else that is more impactful for you, be that education or more, time choice, or starting a business or creating an alternative income stream or whatever it is. It just allows you to really just, shift that focus. So I can definitely see how that it appeals to people, and ultimately it sort of spreads like wildfire. Once people start seeing others doing it, they get really energized about what the possibilities are for them. So I know
100%.
that tiny living has totally changed the course of my life, and it seems like it has totally changed the course of your life as well. Probably, well, you can speak to whether or not you would have become a tiny living filmmaker if you were in a traditional path. So share with us how living in that van and then ultimately in your RV changed the course of your life.
Well, the vans were a lot more. When I got into them, they were a lot more about traveling and experiences, and being able to kind of have lower expenses while traveling, and then coming back and being able to establish myself not in such a rough way. Because when I went hitchhiking, I came back to no housing, no job. When I had a van and I'd go traveling, I'd come back to maybe no job, but at least I have somewhere to live. And it's even if it's just a van, while I reestablish myself. And this was in, my late teens, early 20s. I was doing this kind of stuff. Um, a couple of years ago, so this was 4 years ago now, I bought this RV, and I was renting at the time in Victoria. It's one of the most expensive places to live in Canada, and I was working full time at building a business, which had replaced my, this filmmaking had replaced my income from working in a restaurant, and my partner was working almost full time, and we were able to just have a couple $100 at the end of the month extra, and I basically put this motorhome, this RV, on a credit card. basically, and I thought, okay, if we live in this for a year, this motorhome costs $9,000. If we live in it for a year, that's way less than what we would pay in rent for that year. So it pays itself back. Like, thinking of in like the investment kind of way, it's like an investment that pays itself back in a year. That's pretty good. So that was my idea. And then it was also conducive for my business being able to travel and actually live the lifestyle of the other subjects that I was filming, and being able to go from location to location really easily. So that worked itself out really well. And we actually ended up living in the motorhome longer than a year. And we lived in it long enough to basically build up a down payment, which then I used to buy a house. Um, and kind of get into, I really did use that small living as a stepping stone to further kind of my financial goals in my life. And that house was not a tiny house. It was too big of a house, actually. It was an old farmhouse in very rural Ontario, Canada, where prices were relatively cheap compared to everything else. And I used my skills, from renovating the motorhome, from building out the vans, from everything that I've learned from filming with people that have built really unique spaces. Like, tiny houses are so unique in the way they're built. And I learned so much by talking with these people, that I used those skills to renovate this house, with help from my partner's family as well. But we kind of use that. And then there's this whole other aspect we can talk about as well. But I went from living small in a small motorhome with my partner to living in this 4-bedroom farmhouse that is had extension on extension. It was just such a big house for two people. And then we realized, like, this isn't how we want to live either. So even though we became homeowners, we kind of fulfilled a part of that kind of American dream. And like I said, in Canada, it's so unattainable. Like, I felt very special to actually be able to buy a house, even though it was so cheap and run down and all this. But I did feel very fortunate still. And then realizing, like, oh, this isn't actually the lifestyle we want to live either. This is too much space. This is just a lot of extra space to heat and look after, and we have to clean up this giant house all the time. And then, now I'm in this small cabin. We've kind of gone back to trying to figure out what works for us in the size wise. I think people sometimes have this idea that, like, oh, I want to be mega rich, I want to have a mansion. It's like, having that mansion's a huge amount of work. It's not really the best option for everybody. So that's kind of, I'm trying to figure out where in the spectrum of housing works for me. And right now we're in a 450 square foot cabin with a loft. And so far, we've been making it work really well with the two people.
Yeah, that's so good. I think the thing about the large homes is that you feel compelled to fill that space with stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so then it kind of throws you off of your minimalism and you're only having what serves you, and into this mindset of, oh, we need to decorate and fill every room and make it purposeful. And the reason why old homes are so large is because families used to be so much larger. And so
Hmm.
we have old homes and we have new homes that are very large. And yet at the same time, one of my previous guests pointed out that if you look at a heat map, people only use about 50% or whatever of their space actually, and a lot of rooms sit empty, but we feel compelled to fill them with space. So it sounds like that you have come back to what feels most intentional for you and are kind of settled into what fits your life and your relationship right now.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really, really good point about the wasted space. And yeah, I think there are challenges to living small. There's never going to be everything. Like, you're never really going to find, like, the perfect situation. I think there's always going to be things that need to be adjusted and changed depending on your circumstances and what changes in your own life. Um, but I do like the challenge of living small. And I also think there's a lot of benefits that people don't really realize, like just the convenience of having your kitchen nearby and not having to walk so far. And, like, there's a lot of nice conveniences about living small that I really enjoy, actually, that that I missed a lot when I was living in that bigger house. I would actually spend nights all the time in my camper van just because I loved how convenient everything was.
Yes, I joke about walking myself to death in this house that I'm standing in right now that's on the market. Like, gosh, it takes so many minutes to get, the laundry from room to room instead of it all just being kind of crammed there in the kitchen. So,
Yeah.
everything, nothing is perfectly ideal, right? There's going to be hard parts of anything. The point is pick your hard, right?
Yeah.
And if having a large space where don't use all the space and air conditioning that space and paying the mortgage on that space and insuring that space and all of that is a hard that works for you and you like that and that's important to you, then great. But if it's
Yeah.
not, then definitely there are other options out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to think about this stuff too. Like, um, that's why I appreciate your podcast. Is it poses the question in people's heads of like, what would actually work for me? A lot of people don't really think about that much, but I think if we do think about that, then we're going to get more value out of what we choose. And like you said, we choose the difficulties we want in life. Or at least we can try to choose those things, and that will benefit us, I think.
And so, one of the challenges that people do face that kind of comes with tiny living very often is some sort of alternative work, right? Because
Mm,
a lot of people that are doing this are not wanting to be in the traditional corporate rat race or climbing the ladder. And some people are, right? There's,
mhm,
a full spectrum of people. But very often, the option is if I lower my housing costs, that means I can have more meaningful work, and that might be a little less traditional. So I
mhm.
really wanted you to share with us about how you've designed your work and income around your lifestyle, being that you had some desire to travel for a while, you did some homesteading for a while, now you're back in a cabin, and yet you're not working a corporate job and you're not working at the restaurant you used to work at. So, what did it look like for you to figure out how to make money in this sort of unique way of being?
Well, I've always wanted, financial freedom to some respect and sort of autonomy over my time. Um, it's been something that's been really important to me since I got my first job when I was 14 and had to show up and get bossed around by somebody and told what to do all the time, and then just been like, this isn't this isn't interesting to me. This isn't fun. This isn't what I want to do. And I was privileged enough to have parents that encouraged me to try, be entrepreneurial, and to um, not necessarily like be so serious about it. And not everybody is in that position. The position that I was in. And I was also just lucky with timing as well. A lot of things, people, a lot of business stuff and entrepreneurial things, people chalk up to their skill and their ability and everything, but I think a lot of it is timing as well. And there is some skill on picking opportunities and being aware of the time that you exist in. But like I said, when I made my first video about van life wasn't really a thing. And there was this small community of people interested in it. And I just said, hey, I'll serve these people. I enjoy this content. I just followed my personal curiosity, my personal passion of sharing these spaces and looking into how people can live differently. Um, and I just continued to follow that because I thought it was good to share that information and maybe inspire other people to think differently about how they want to live in this world and what we consume and yeah, just kind of open up the path for different opportunities for people. So that was kind of my, you know, it, I think if somebody is to do like an entrepreneurial thing, the most important aspect behind that is having a really strong why. And so I had a really strong why of why I wanted to share this information. But to kind of talk more broadly and more about the subject of just like working sort of a different way because of living in a tiny house or living in a smaller dwelling, an alternative space. um, there is lots of opportunity now. The big kind of work from home era has happened, and there's still, a lot of remote work because of that. And the technology that we have now, like, I had Starlink at my place in rural Ontario, my homestead, and it was amazing. It was super fast, and the latency was amazing. Um, and that's just a brand new technology, basically a couple of years old. Like, when we first moved there, we didn't have that. Like, the only internet was either like terrible satellite, or literally they still offered dial up. So it was like, I just waited an entire year, and then Starlink became available. I got the quickest one I could, and just went for it. And so there is more options of working online. A lot of our world is digital, and we can participate in that to whatever way that kind of suits you. And I would recommend, I mean, if you have the privilege and the ability to work with what you're passionate about, and that is possible, or more possible, by living small. If you build a tiny house instead of a house, the costs are going to be so much significantly less because of the materials. If you live in a van instead of a house, I mean, once again, right, it's so much cheaper. So that could allow you to think more about, what effect do I want to have by the work that I do.
And did you like come to your idea just sort of out of serendipity and luck and you're, just kind of, I'm going to be a filmmaker? Or was it something that you had always felt called to do? Or like, how did that piece of it come about?
Well, I was always interested in film and music, like video and music, and I would kind of always jump back and forth in my teenage years. And growing up, my brother is 7 years older than me, so he had like a VHS, like full tape video camera, and would like film stuff with his friends. And I was I w- I grew up in the era of there being these kind of breakout hits on TV and in media that were, it's before YouTube, where everybody now knows, oh, you can film yourself and you can do something with that. It was like at the beginning of that. So a lot of my inspirations were these movies and TV shows that were like super low budget but very successful, and very kind of doable. And so I saw all this media out there that I enjoyed, that really impacted me, and I saw it as something I could do. So I think, if you only watch big Marvel movies, you think, oh, I can't really do that. So it doesn't really inspire you to like think about doing it, because it's just completely unattainable. So I kind of had that base in just my experience, and yeah, that is basically luck, that I saw these things as possible where other people didn't. I made my first check from YouTube when I was 13 years old. And, even when I was 19, and I started actually making some money from it, and 20 when I, or 21, I think, when I went full time on it, it's like every single person I talked to about it was, oh, you can make money on that? How does that work? How do you make money from YouTube? And it's like, well, it's the same way as people make money on TV. But it was just completely like it wasn't completely unknown at that point, but it was like very much, um, that was the first question I get is, oh, how do you even make money from that? So there was definitely just a bit of that. And then yeah, like I said, I really just stumbled upon this community of van life, and then living and being young and seeing my friends live in vans and tiny houses, and just thinking, hey, if this video did this well, and if I made, like, literally, how I went full time with this film, with this documentary series, was I just thought, if I make one of these a week and I make 100 of them, I can, and they make this much money per month. That is my full expenses for the month. And so my goal initially was to just make 100 of these documentaries on single individuals, or people living in alternative dwellings. And so far I've made 250 plus of them. So it was just it was kind of just a decision of just saying, hey, this is has some ability, some success to it, the attempts that I've made. And then my interest was, yeah, just documenting the truth, showing reality. And that was something that I grew up doing with my brother, filming. And then just, yeah, just being affected by documentaries and kind of like TV and movies throughout my life.
Yeah, I love the way that our sort of fabric of life, all of our experiences, kind of weave together, and you don't even realize you can be in one place doing one job, and a couple of years you're doing something completely different, and you're like, how is any of this going to play together? But the things that we're exposed to, it's like that saying, you can't be what you can't see. And
Yeah.
so if you like see something that maybe you don't even realize at the time how much impact it's having, our brains put together our life experience like Lego blocks. And then one day you end up with this avatar in front of you of this business idea or some need in the market that just seems very timely. And then it's just a matter of taking that risk that's
Hmm.
required to do something different that nobody has been doing, or a little bit different, or focused on a little different niche, or whatever. But ultimately, we're all sort of like walking around waiting for that life experience to kind of show up in our lives, and an idea that maybe we could make enough money to pay the bills, and then we can work from passion instead of following a traditional path. So, would you consider yourself working like full time or part time on this work that you're doing?
Um, well, it's it's kind of like gig work. I treat it like that. It's kind of like almost like a tradesperson gets like a construction worker will be building a building, and then once that's finished, they kind of have to find another building to be a part of. Whatever trade they're in or whatever. So I think about it like that. So there's periods in my life and throughout the few years of full-time business that I've done with this, where I'll be working an insane amount and all the time, and then there'll be periods of time where I have nothing going on, and there's some flexibility within that too. It's like a big gray area spectrum. So right now I'm working on four major films that I'm producing or directing or writing or editing. So there's a lot to do with those. But I spread it out so that I'll work on one, I'll work on another, and I have a team working on one, and the other ones two of them are a lot more solo, and I can kind of schedule in when I want to work on them. But it's it's probably on average, I'm probably, filling up my time with work and projects. Like even I have a podcast, which isn't making me any money. It's not producing anything really. But you know, that is work that I'm choosing to do for the potential in the future of it. So there's kind of like my business is spread out over like major work that I kind of need to do to further this business, and then there's side stuff that has potential that I'm working on. Um, but I would say, yeah, overall, I probably work a little bit less than like a full time job, but with a lot more flexibility on top of that.
Yeah, I think the flexibility piece is what everybody's aiming for, right? We can find work that we love maybe, and work that we're passionate about, and the point is, can I do it in the time blocks that are best, supportive of how I feel? Like, a lot of people are most productive in the morning. So can I arrange my work so that I really get my really major tasks done in the morning, and that I leave time specifically in the week that I know I like to be most social, to have my interactions with others. And that
Mhm.
is the greatest thing about having your own business, is being able to wrap your schedule around how you feel and are most productive, and what resonates with you. If you're feeling really creative today and you've got some writing to do, you can focus on that instead of focusing on something else. So, was it hard for you to kind of make that switch to be from being managed to self-management? Because that's another key challenge for folks, is
Mhm.
figuring out how to structure their life and how to stay on task, and being self-managed.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been some challenges for that for me. Like the self managed position that that you get yourself into, starting your own business or being an entrepreneur. What you really need is self discipline, but you also need like reflection time and even understanding what your work is. So my work is very creative. So a lot of times it's about like going for a walk can be work for me because I need to go for a walk to be able to think about something, or I need to spend time like writing a document, or I need to give myself a break from like the actual physical work of filming or editing to allow my brain to have some space to work on these kind of more hard to grasp things. So even understanding what your work is, like you know, uh, for me, it was like so part of it is like the not really having much to fall back on. So I don't have much to fall back on. So when I became full time in my business, I was extremely hungry for work. I was extremely hungry to prove myself, and I was extremely hungry to pay my rent, to buy food. I wanted to work really hard so that I would feel secure. So that's what drove me a lot, was just that urge to survive. Um, so that was part of my reasoning for going full time, was can I actually do this? Is this just on weekends or after work, this filmmaking thing, or could I spend more time doing this and actually really thrive and really grow a lot more than if I was just doing it on the weekends and that. So I had that why of just needing to make enough money to live, was really strong. um and then yeah, there's a lot of aspects to it. But for me, it was a little bit less challenging because I've I've never really accepted the work that I've had. I've always, part of me rejected it. Like the job I had, the last job I had, was in a restaurant, and they're looking for, chef, sous chef, managers. They're looking for all types of people. The only position I wanted was dishwasher because I did not want responsibility. And throughout that entire time I was working there for about a year, they kept promoting me. They kept giving me pay raises. They kept saying, "Hey, do you want to do this instead? Do you want to do this?" And I was just like, I don't know. Like, I don't really want to do more. Like, I just want to use this to build something else. I just want to do my own thing. So there's always been that part of me. I I've never held a job for a very long time. I'm maybe a unique specimen in that respect, of just always wanting to do my own thing, throughout my entire life. So in that way, it wasn't hard, but there is some very it is difficult to always be self-disciplined and not to burn yourself out, and to balance it, and to create like a schedule that works for you. And but maybe it's not like a 9 to 5, 5 days a week, Monday to Friday schedule. Maybe it's different than that, and allowing yourself to have flexibility, but not taking advantage of the fact that there's nobody, needing those reports on their desk from you. It's like you could allow yourself to become really, um, you know, negligent in the work that would propel your business. So there has been a lot of balancing that, and there's been phases throughout these years of me working for myself where I've maybe done a lot, like too much work, and I burn myself out, or I haven't done enough work, and then I start feeling really antsy, and like I've missed opportunities, or like there has been some challenges with that. And I've just found that working on organization, working on my mental health, has been the things that have helped my business the most. And it seems counterintuitive. It seems like, oh, just put your head down, put in the work that you need to do, just focus on that, drink some extra coffee, and just go, go, go is the way to go forward in life. And for me, that's actually not really been the case. It's step back from what you're doing, analyze it, make sure you're doing it efficiently, and make sure that I'm at the best that I can be, so that I can be the best I need to be. Because at the end of the day, when you have a business, there is a lot of weight on your shoulders. And for me, I have a very small team and I work with them to certain degrees. But basically everything comes back to me, and it's my responsibility to really complete things. And so with that is the just the understanding that if I'm not who I want to be, if I'm not who I need to be, that my work will suffer from that. So it's been a lot of the the development of my business has also been a lot of self-development of who I am as an individual.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so much about self-compassion too, right? This is a journey, not a destination, and nobody's going to have it all figured out overnight. And the minute you start to get it figured out, you come up with a new idea. So you have to
Yeah.
take on a new project and learn new hard things. And so just the autonomy of choice, though, to be able to do what you have a strong why for is so valuable and such a privilege of, living in a way that your cost of living is lower.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate all those details that you shared. Um, so you have filmed a lot of people doing alternative living in different ways. Are there any other examples that you feel comfortable sharing of people kind of figuring out how to, work for passion and have a strong why in the work that they're doing, specifically in tiny living, van life, or RVs, or cabins, or homesteads, or any of the things?
Oh, specific. Uh, it all melds together. I have a pretty poor memory. Like just in general, I have a pretty bad memory, so I'd have to really think of that and like look at examples. But um, so for like a specific example, but there are lots of people who, I can think of one example actually of a couple that moved into a van and this was when I was traveling in Australia. I filmed a bunch of documentaries over there. They moved into a van that they built out themselves, and they built it specifically for rock climbing because that was their passion. And by living in that, they moved out of the house that they owned and they began renting that house out. And then they used that money that they got from having a cheaper existence by living in the van, and the extra income that they got from renting, from being landlords, to invest into uh, stocks. And they were also, when I was talking to them, going to buy another house to rent out more. So it's like they were building their portfolio, and that was the way that they were going to reach some sort of financial freedom, was having investments. And they were not like, it wasn't only just about making money for them. It wasn't like there was just like this some business plan that they were going to like make a bunch of money and just be able to hoard all this money. It was like they also got to live the existence they wanted to with all their rock climbing gear with them, and they were able to drive to the base of a mountain and stay there in their camper van and be able to climb that mountain the next day, and it was this beautiful mix of being able to do more of what they love to do on their weekends and actually be able to improve their financial situation drastically because of living that way.
That's an awesome example.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love that. So, you are in the middle of so many great projects right now. So, please share with the listeners what work you're really proud of, what you're excited that's going to come out soon, and how they can find and follow you.
Okay. Well, I did mention I'm working on 4 projects. I'll tell you briefly about those, but before I do, I have a documentary. It's on Prime Video and it's on YouTube as well. So that's on my YouTube channel called Different Media, and it's a documentary about van life and about the Instagram online kind of showcase of living in a van compared to reality. So it's called The Reality of Hashtag Van Life. So I would check that out if you're interested in van life and my documentary work. I'm working on 4 documentaries. One is about vintage motorcycles, and I'm going to be making it with a friend of mine who was the cinematographer for another documentary I made called Moments, which was us traveling around in a sailboat. Um, so I'm really excited for that one. I'm making a documentary about the current state of magic mushrooms, and how we are basically on the precipice here in Canada of legalizing them in some way. There's publicly traded companies that do psychedelic assisted therapy with psilocybin mushrooms, and there's storefronts selling them all over the place. We're very similar to where we were pre legalization of cannabis. So it's a that's what interested me about that subject. I'm making a documentary about my mother who passed away, and she did the MAID experience. She had stage 4 breast cancer, and she had a very different way of dying. So it's kind of a look at a different way to die in this world. And yeah, so I'm working on that. There's one other one. Oh yeah, I'm working on a documentary following 3 different homesteaders at different stages of homesteading, and it's a bigger look at the back to the land movement and what it really takes to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, because that's a big idea. Like, a lot of people that I've met that want to live small, they also want to live on land. They want to grow their own food. They want to have some animals, maybe. They want to have some sharing and some community. And so what does that actually look like? So that's a documentary I'm working on as well. And if you just wanted to follow anything that I do, my YouTube channel is Forrest Stevens. That's also where I post my podcast, which is the Forrest Stevens Show, which is sometimes with guests and oftentimes just myself musing about life and going deeper into different self-development and self-improvement things that I explore.
Awesome. That's definitely a lot and all very relevant topics in permaculture. In my permaculture class, I've been studying this whole idea around community. It seems like that eco villages, people wanting to live together and grow food together, is something that is I see constantly on my Instagram feed. Their, point of view. Does anybody else want to get together and start a community? It seems to be like a very hot topic right now.
Yep.
And so lots for you going on. Thank you so much for sharing your time today and your experience. And we will definitely talk again.
Great. Thanks, Laura. I appreciate being on. And yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Hey, I'm honored that you listened to this episode of Less House, More Moolah. I hope something in it will help you continue to move toward a life aligned with your values. Every algorithm out there is trying to tell us what to prioritize, but we get to choose. If you haven't ever identified your key values, I have a free resource on my website to help you. Just have to go to thetinyhouseadvisor.com. It's thetinyhouseadvisor.com. At the bottom of the page, you can grab the Tiny Life Values Worksheet. When we design a life around what is our core truth, we shortcut to deep fulfillment. See you next Thursday.
Please see the show notes for important disclosure regarding the Tiny House Advisor LLC and this episode.